All right, we're still in section 9.4. We're taking the next step, and not only do we have an amplitude and a period change, but we also have a phase shift, which is a horizontal shift left or right, as well as a vertical shift up or down. So one of the things to remember when we're in this form is the first thing we want to do is factor out that b value. And so we have 4 times the sine. We factor out a 4. We're left with theta minus, and so that becomes pi over 8 minus 1, right? And notice if I distribute again, I get 4 times the theta, which gets us back to the 4 theta. If I do 4 times pi over 8, that reduces to pi over 2. Okay, so identifying our transformations, our amplitude is 4. The period, here's our b value, so it's 2 pi over the absolute value of 4, or pi over 2. Our phase shift, that's going to be pi over 8 to the right, because it's minus. And then our vertical shift will be 1 down. Okay, so this graph actually works. We've seen where others don't. So we're going to graph one period. We're going to start at pi over 8 to the right, so that's pi over 4, so the midpoint will be pi over 8. Now, normally, right, we would be going from -4 up to 4. That's because of our amplitude. But this whole graph is going to be shifted down 1. So instead of going from -4 to 4, we're going to go from -5 to 3. And then the midpoint, right, because remember we have that midline going across, is between -5 and 3 would be at -1, right? -5, we go up 4 because that's half the height, or down 4, and that's going to get us to -1. So we start at pi over 8 to the right, and we will be right here. Oops, that's pi over 4. So we're in the middle there. Okay, so we started pi over 8, and we're going to go pi over 2 to complete one period. So the end, what I want to do is take pi over 8 and add pi over 2. So getting a common denominator, right, going into 8, so that's 4 pi over 8. So we're going to end at 5 pi over 8. So there's 1 pi. That's 1/4 is 2. Then in here is going to be 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8, and then one period will end here at 5 pi over 8. You know, the more I look at this, I think that's going to be a little tight, and there's no reason for us to do that. So let's make another graph, and again, you can put your own scales. So we're going to go from 3 down to -5. Here I am starting at pi over 8. I'm going to end at 5 pi over 8. That midline is at -1. So we have that point, and we have that point. Okay, so with our sine graph, we know we're going to go up because we have a positive A. We're going to go up, down, up. So the midpoint between 5 pi and 1 pi, right? 5 plus 1 is 6, divided by 2 is 3 pi over 8. And we're going to find the midpoint here, and that'll be up here at 3. So the midpoint between 3 and 1 is 2 pi over 8. You can leave it as that. I know we would normally reduce, but for our purposes for graphing, and then between 3 and 5, it's 4 pi over 8, which is also pi over 2, which brings us down here to -5. Right, so we're going up 4 and down 4 from that midline, and the midline we get from that -1 shift down. So we're going to go up, come down here, and then up again. So there's one period of this function with those transformations. Okay, let's look at another graph here. So again, we need to factor out our b value, which in this case would be 1/3. So we're left with 4 cosine 1/3 theta plus 2 pi plus 1. Okay, so now we find our amplitude, which is 4. The period, 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1/3. That's positive, so that's 6 pi. So that's how long it takes to complete one cycle. Our phase shift, because it's plus, will now be 2 pi to the left, and our vertical shift will be 1 up. All right, so again, this graph isn't bad, but I like starting, taking that first period, starting at 0, going to 2 pi, and shifting that left or right. So I want to shift that 2 pi to the left. So I'm going to get rid of that. And so we start at negative 2 pi, 0, there's pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, more than I need, 5 pi. Okay, so period is 6 pi. So if we start at 2 pi to the left and we add 6 pi, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we know we're going to end there at 4 pi. So we're taking into account our period and our phase shift. Now the amplitude, right, is 4. That's half the height. So we're going from negative 4 up to 4. But now we have a vertical shift up 1. So that means that we move all of this up 1. So we're going to be up at 5 and negative 3. So I'm going to get rid of the 4. I don't need to see that. This may clean things up a little bit for you visually. And then what's our midline? Well, the halfway point between 5 and negative 3 is going to be 1, right? 4 down, 4 up. Okay, so we know what our cosine curve generally looks like. So we start here at negative 2 pi. Okay, we're going to end at 4 pi. Okay, so now we have to find the midpoint between those, right? So 4 plus negative 2 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. So at 1 pi, it means we're down here at negative 3. So now the midpoint here between 1 and 4 is actually 2.5, right? 4 plus 1 is 5, divided by 2 is 5 halves, or 2.5. So that's going to be right here. There's 5 pi over 2, and that's going to be right here at the midline 1. And then we have to have that same point here. So if we take negative 2 pi plus 1 pi, that's negative 1 pi. Divide that by 2, and we get, whoops, that should have been a negative pi over 2. And now we have our points. We know this is periodic, so it's going to continue to repeat. We draw those arrows showing that. And then there is 1 pi, and there is all of our transformations. All right, I hope that helps, and we'll see you soon.